Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here today. As many of you know, I'm Alexi Rodriguez with the Almond Alliance, and we are happy to have you all. So, we all recognize that the industry has been operating in one of the most complex environments we've seen in years. We've had rising input costs, tightening regulations, expanding pest pressure, and global trade uncertainty. And these challenges unfortunately don't just show up one at a time so we can deal one before the other comes. They all came at once and created this compounding effect that ultimately created an environment that determined whether or not growers were going to be able to survive the cycle that we're in. And that's why at the Almond Alliance, we've been sharpening and reorienting our efforts, directing our time and resources and advocacy towards the areas that most directly influence profitability. We simply cannot just react. Our industry needs an organization that is proactive, strategic, and firmly aligned around the core question, does this strengthen our industry today, and does it secure the future for generations to come? So today's panel is about connection, how these forces intersect, what's driving them, and what the Almond Alliance is doing to keep growers competitive. And I'll just take a note to the crowd. If you have any questions throughout our presentation today, Annie and Nicole are handing out note cards. Feel free to flag them down. Oh, and Tad in the back as well, to write down your questions as you have them, and they will bring them up at the end for a question and answer session. So with that, I'd like to turn over the discussion lead to our chair, Blake Vann.
Thank you, Alexi. You summed that up well, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our panel to talk about some of the issues that we're dealing with. The environment's complicated. It's changing faster than we can react to. Prices are improving, but margins are still tight. Inputs keep going up. We have pressure from invasive species out there, from abandoned orchards. The policy shifts, state, federal, regulatory, and then we've got the global trade landscape that we're dealing with as well. Today's not about the isolated topics. We're really going to try to put all of that together and connect the dots with all these different issues that the industry's facing and what we're doing as an alliance to deal with this and continue to keep the almond industry competitive. With that, Alexi, do you want to start right there and talk about the major headwinds the industry's facing?
Yeah, of course. So we've already touched on a few of these themes, but it's important to outline them clearly. And so when we talk about profitability in almonds, there isn't just one pressure point. It's layered. You know, a single policy or market event is not likely to sink you, but when it's compounding, the effect squeezes margins and erodes market confidence. So first, on our topic of discussion is going to be pest and rodent pressure. We've seen an increase across the valley, and it's having a profound impact on yields, quality, and the cost of production. Next, we're going to talk about trade volatility. Almonds are very export dependent, and tariff exposure is one of the biggest threats to price stability and market growth. And beyond that, we're going to talk about the regulatory burdens, especially on the state side, from pesticide regulations to groundwater adjudication proposals to food safety, classification policies. Growers are absorbing higher compliance costs, more reporting, and more operational constraints than ever. Then we have the objective estimate. It is no secret that the objective estimate had a profound impact on the market this year, and it forced us to take a look at how the uncertainty around the number impacts the market. It drove us to engage with NASS and to ask some of our industry veterans, is there a better way we could be going about this? And then lastly, we've got transportation, market access, and federal engagement. Shipping fluidity, regulatory communications, public perception, and access to research or disaster assistance really influences the ability for the industry to weather the storms. And in addition to that, reputation management has now become directly connected to demand, policy outcomes, and future investment. So when you stack all these pieces together, the picture becomes clearer. Profitability is not a single line item. It is the intersection of all of these forces, and our job at the Almond Alliance is to stay ahead of these challenges.
Thank you, Alexi. with that, pest and rodent pressure has gone from a nuisance to a major budget line item with abandoned orchards and all the issues that come with that. Katie's been on the front lines dealing with that up and down the state. Katie, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah. As you touched, rodent pressure is one of the most persistent and costly challenges that growers are facing right now. It has exploded across the valley, largely driven by abandoned and stressed orchards, with Kern, Fresno, and Merced counties being the hardest hit. Once those acres go unmanaged, they become breeding grounds, and pests don't stay put, so they start to obviously move into neighbors. They chew through irrigation systems, damaging burns, and they're really hitting the younger plantings hard as well, resulting in millions of dollars worth of damage. What's really unfortunate is that this issue isn't going away quickly. Sigma definitely is playing a big role in this, as there's a lack of inputs, and now these orchards are becoming more and more stressed because of the water shortages. We're pushing USDA and NRCS to make EQIP more flexible to assist with the cost of orchard removal. We've also been active in helping policymakers understand the real economic consequences of unmanaged ground and pushing for accountability and tools to address it. Erin's been working hard on that as well. The Alliance is working with CDFA, DPR, UCCE, and other partners through the statewide working group to drive coordinated action, and that's key, coordinated action, to improve field monitoring, regulatory awareness, and outreach. Because this isn't a local issue, it's regional, interconnected, and accelerating very quickly. The rodent problem is one piece of a bigger picture. When you zoom out, it fits into a much broader invasive species challenge that we've been facing over time. We have species that threaten production, orchard longevity, export markets, and regulatory certainty. We'll see it in Carpophilus beetle, navel orangeworm dynamics, and just new pest introductions we're starting to see as well that we want to be proactive about. What we're missing today is really a united strategy, one that connects CDFA, USDA, regulators, researchers, and all of industry. They're kind of like working in their own silos. So we want to get everybody in the same silo. Driving alignment, building a real coordinated response, and that's our top of priority right now, how we want to handle that.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate that. So we've kind of talked about some of the issues on the farm side. Now we'll kind of transition over to some global issues with trade, some of the barriers we're facing there, and what the Alliance is doing to manage those issues. Alexi, can you go ahead and talk a little bit about what the Alliance is doing to protect market access?
Yeah, so trade is arguably the single biggest factor that can impact profitability. A significant share of our crop moves overseas, which means that tariffs, retaliatory actions, non-tariff barriers, shipping rules, and buyer sentiment don't just matter, but they are critical. They're critical to preserving the marketability of California almonds. Over the past year, we've been deeply engaged with USTR, USDA, and the administration to prevent new retaliatory tariffs from landing on almonds. We've also walked them through the impacts of the 2018-2019 tariff cycle that resulted in the reduced export value, lost market share, specifically in China, and the long-term competitive disadvantage that happened in response to Australia taking over some of that market share. That history is important because it demonstrates how fast policy decisions translate into market consequences. Our additional trade priorities fall into several key areas. First is securing tariff relief and preventing new retaliatory measures in key markets. An announcement was made earlier this week for $12 million in farm aid, and about $1 billion of that will be going to specialty crops to be released at a later date. And we are working closely with the administration alongside with ABC to ensure that our growers' needs are heard and that they receive funding as well. We're leveraging ongoing negotiations and reciprocal agreements. We're addressing shipping and logistical barriers. The Alliance joined an ag coalition alongside other industry partners to really push the excessive Section 301 penalty structures that were disproportionately impacting exporters. After months of engagement with the administration, Congress, and the Federal Maritime Commission, a one-year pause was secured, giving us some breathing room to negotiate a permanent, more common sense solution. We are also working to expand market opportunities, and that's including the approval of hull exports into Asia that would create additional revenue streams outside of kernels alone. We've already seen some tangible outcomes. Working with industry partners, including the Almond Board, we helped to secure the elimination of retaliatory tariffs in Turkey. We're also supporting progress toward a new EU trade framework that has the potential to reduce non-tariff barriers and streamline regulatory requirements in one of our highest value markets. So when trade policy moves in a favorable direction, it's something that our industry feels almost immediately, which is why trade is one of our highest priorities this year.
Thank you, Alexi. So we've talked about external forces shaping grower returns. Now let's shift to some of the internal forces with state policy and regulation that seems to move very fast in this state and is pretty tough to keep up with and stay on top of, but that's one of our main goals, and Erin helps us out with that. Erin, if you could kind of share the landscape there with us.
Sure, and please bear with me. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm a little under the weather here. But 2025 was one of the biggest and busiest years that I've experienced as a lobbyist. California wasn't just up to, its normal, 2,500 bills that they're introducing, but they were very keen on counteracting everything that the Trump administration was doing. It was, we were plagued by continued budgetary woes, climate negotiations, and an aggressive regulatory agenda that touched every sector, including agriculture. And like previous years, the biggest wins for the Almond Alliance were in what we stopped. We're playing defense 99% of the time, trying to keep government out of business and out of the ways that we're operating. As Alexi or Blake, I can't remember who referenced earlier, we stopped several attempts to expand state control over groundwater and several bills that had to do with groundwater adjudication. We were able to get ahead and counter some of the Trump actions, or California was trying to, by introducing some legislation on nexus waters, so waters of the United States, and further expanding that out. Seeing some recent activity from the Trump administration, that means that bill is going to be coming back this next year. On the nutrition side, we prevented almonds from being labeled, or almond products being labeled ultra-processed. That was a really big deal to get them fully exempted, and then also get that bill limited to schools only, and schools that, or products that are served in schools. Almonds currently aren't in that area. But I think that helped really protect reputation of almonds and the nutritional value that we've been talking about so much, and the consumer perception. We did have some good offensive wins this year as well. We passed some legislation, supported and passed some legislation to deal with the abandoned orchards issue, to provide some additional tools. We were proactive on-farm composting on the California Water Plan. We were able to protect Prop 4 bond funds, and then we continued work on looking at other potential revenue sources for farmers that have fallowed land by potentially looking at solar projects. That was just in the legislature. We still had, several fronts that we were fighting on at the regulatory agencies as well. We were working with CDFA, we're working with DPR, we're working with CARB, CalSTA, all of these different agencies, Cal OSHA. So as Alexi referenced to, challenge regulatory proposals on 1,3D, and we're looking at SF as well going into the next few years. Cost burdens by opposing CARB's attempt to gain open-ended regulatory fee authority. We advocated for funding for airborne remote sensing of snow for water reliability and predictability. We engaged on Cal OSHA's gate regulations. That would have been a very costly and burdensome task for any of you with property that has a gate. And then autonomous tractors, we were able to weigh in with Cal OSHA that, on a proposal that we basically would have required registration of any autonomous tractor, and kick that back to a committee. So we've been very busy on the policy front, and we're going into the next year of a 2-year session. I expect it to be another very busy year for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Erin. The interesting part about that is that's just an overview. I mean, the amount of issues that her and her team are dealing with are something else to see on a daily basis.
I would add to that too. One of the things you just slightly touched on it, but it's I think a big win for our industry just in terms of progress and opening up the lines of communication with DPR specifically was the work that the Almond Alliance was able to do in conjunction with the Almond Board of California and Gabrielle Ludwig specifically, and getting her on a panel to discuss post-harvest fumigants. Anybody in here who ships product around the world knows how critical that sulfurofluoride or perfume and phosphine are to our industries, and so to be able to get some representation there, not only from her but from other industry individuals, to provide a realistic overview of what these tools do for us, not only here domestically, but internationally as well, was pretty critical. I think another big one that we helped to at least postpone was SB 295 with the algorithms. So there was language that was added later, sort of at the last minute, that was going to include agriculture. And the problem with that is that it was super vague, and if left to interpretation, it would have impacted all of the ways that we communicate data about our crops. So position reports, objective estimates, any market reporting that comes out from any groups, that all could have been subject to regulation. So that, I think, was a really big win. We worked with Ag Council on that. They did a lot. I mean, I think Tricia was running through the Capitol. So it was a really, really big win for us. And those are the things that you don't really get to hear a lot about.
Yeah, and that bill will be coming back next year, but that one was a real fun one. It was added at the very last minute, and we were able to have that bill come up for a vote, and it only got 13 votes out of 80 on the assembly floor, so that was a really big win. It was a fun one.
Well, that's a pretty big segue into our next subject. So we talked about some on-farm issues, global trade issues, and then regulatory. Another big deal that the industry dealt with was the objective estimate and what that did to the industry. Alexi, could you maybe share with the group how the Alliance engaged with the objective estimate and the goals there?
Yes, of course. Okay, so when the objective estimate came out, the questions came to me almost immediately, and is there anything that the Almond Alliance can do? And so I talked a lot to our board members, and ultimately what we decided is, yes, there is something that we can do. And what we decided was to pursue some clarification for the industry to have in order to make some informed decisions. So we moved pretty quickly and met with NASS to raise 2 key issues. And the first was, how were abandoned orchards accounted for in their estimate? And second, what improvements could be made to their overall methodology? And to their credit, they really were great. They showed up, they heard our concerns, and they agreed to expand their narrative. And they also showed up to our meeting with ideas of ways that they could improve their overall methodology to obtain some better accuracy. But then we waited for 2.5 months for an expanded narrative that was released quietly without any public notice or posting. And at that point, it became very clear that under the current system, this is likely the best that we're going to get, and it just wasn't enough. Their statistical models simply cannot keep up with the changes that are occurring in the industry right now. Abandoned acres are going to continue to be a factor. Sigma is reshaping water availability, and many growers are cutting inputs, which is going to have an impact on yield. A traditional model just simply isn't built to capture those types of structural shifts, at least not in the near term. And NASS did fully acknowledge this, but they are fundamentally a number-driven organization. And so there's a real hesitancy to move beyond their existing methodology because doing so could compromise objectivity. And I will say as a caveat, they didn't come out and say that. That's my own interpretation. And it does make sense because it would be very, very difficult for any statistical model to account for all of these variables. But that being said, it highlights one of the core issues for us, and that was that if a model has limitations, there has to be a willingness to talk about them so that the industry members who use the reports understand where the potential for blind spots are. And we just didn't get the impression that there was much of an appetite to go there. So we convened a roundtable of industry veterans, people who have farmed, processed, and sold almonds around the world for decades. And we asked them, based on today's technology and data, is this working? And if it's not, what are some alternatives that we should consider? And after about a half a day of going back and forth and discussing all the data and all the ways that the estimate has impacted the market over the past few decades, the answer that we came up with was no, this is not working, and here are two options that would be worth exploring. And so the first was to integrate Land IQ data into a revised subjective estimate, which would because grower participation in the subjective has been declining, and it's likely after this year to decline even further. And so using Land IQ data for planted and removed acres to layer in a targeted grower survey that could produce a more accurate early season estimate through a third party. And then the second alternative that we came up with was to replace the objective estimate with a later season calculation based on actual incoming data that could improve accuracy and, again, reduce volatility. We then shared these concepts with the almond board to help get the conversation started and aid in the deliberation of how to move forward. And speaking as someone who has been in the unique position to have chaired the almond board and worked for an independent handler selling almonds all over the world, I can say with complete confidence that those discussions could not have been easy. Ending or significantly modifying either estimate carries very real risks. The buying community, especially international buyers, rely heavily on these reports, and changing the timing or structure could have an influence on how they contract. So the almond board faced an extremely difficult decision, and I trust that they weighed it carefully with the industry's best interests in mind.
Thank you very much, Alexi. Now, beyond the estimates and price signals, there are other areas that indirectly shape grower returns and are worth calling out. Erin, if we could start with you. What stands out this year and may not hit the price sheet, but absolutely affects the industry's outlook?
I think one of our priorities that we've had for the Almond Alliance is really building relationships. We have about 65% of the legislature right now that has under 2 years of legislating experience. We had 2 very large classes of members elected. They are very new. That is an uphill battle for us in terms of we have to now form a relationship with them, build a personal, political, professional relationship with them, and then educate them on the issues that are impacting our members. And so what we've tried to do in terms of looking at our priorities is where are places that we can lead and be a voice for almonds, and build those relationships and get as much exposure as we can to some of those members, not just our traditional Central Valley representatives that are very familiar with our business in farming and agriculture as a whole, but some of those non-traditional members that are in more of the cities, but to make them aware of the importance of what we do and what are the issues that we are facing on a day-to-day basis. So, out of our priorities, we looked at transportation and thought this is a place we can lead, obviously being an export-heavy commodity that is critical for us in moving product throughout the state and then out of the country. So we looked and strengthened her position by being a resource of information and a member working with the Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement. We also are the only ag entity that has joined the new Sustainable Trade and Commerce Caucus. And, I think that gives us a critical seat at the table with lawmakers as they evaluate, policies that are impacting, transportation and ports and goods movement. And then we also have been working with the coalition for infrastructure improvements along key corridors like the I-15 to keep goods moving efficiently. So we're doing a lot in those space, but just, overall building out our relationships and our presence in the Capitol as a whole.
Thank you, Erin. Let's stay on that same theme. And Katie, can you talk about some of the direct impacts that we've seen some tangible wins at the Alliance this year?
Yeah, I think earlier this year, if we go back to bloom time, we saw a significant bee loss issue, a form of collapse we hadn't seen before, and the Alliance stepped in quickly to ensure the beekeeping industry's concerns weren't lost in bureaucracy. We helped get them in front of ELAP leadership, which ultimately led to funding being released so they could replace hives ahead of this next coming season. On the policy and funding front, we secured $1.5 million for invasive pest mitigation, $500,000 for Carpophilus research. We continued progress on our navel orangeworm sterile moth pilot program, movement on the delayed disaster assistance, and then strategic positioning for potential Section 32 purchases, which is a big one for us. We're not letting up at all, even though it's been really busy. We're staying strong, and 2026 is shaping up to be another pivotal year for us. Farm bill negotiations, disaster programs, and emerging issues mean we'll need to have the same level of alignment and commitment to delivering results and just trying to be proactive on all these issues.
Thank you, Katie. Alexi, let's shift to the bigger picture and talk about the work you've been leading with industry collaboration and reputation management and why these are becoming so important and what that work looks like.
Yeah. So one of the biggest challenges agriculture faces, and especially in California, is that our messaging can sometimes be fragmented. And when we are not aligned, or if our messaging is inconsistent, we lose credibility, and it creates an opening for other groups to step in and define that narrative for us. And that's why the Almond Alliance is working with other ag groups to tighten how we talk about the key issues to achieve one simple goal. And that is clear science-based messaging so that lawmakers, regulators, media, and even buyers hear one clear story about our industry. This is one of the most critical shifts that agriculture needs to make, and almonds are uniquely positioned to lead in this space. We are also working with the Almond Board to manage the industry's political and policy reputation, which is increasingly tied to market access, whether it's the ultra-processed food debate, climate narratives in Europe, or misinformation in foreign media. We're working to ensure that decision makers and global buyers hear accurate, fact-based information, because a strong political reputation translates into stronger trade footing, and that connection is becoming more important every year.
Okay, as we wrap things up here before we start taking some questions, Katie, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Thank you all for being here today. And we have some upcoming changes at the Alliance. We have a new membership structure that will allow more engagement from all of you while meeting individual and companies where they're given difficulties due to the last few years, right? We're trying to make it easier for everyone to be members and be more involved. We'll have more events, brand new committees, and there is a booth downstairs somewhere. I haven't seen it yet because the floor's not open, but Annie, Nicole, different board members, Blake and I, Alexi, will be floating around for anybody who has questions.
Thank you, Katie. Go ahead and pass it over to Erin. Erin, same question. What would you like to leave the audience with today?
Well, I think I like the theme of engagement. That's something that I say every year, as I really encourage all of you to be more engaged with your local and statewide elected officials. your voice carries more weight than any of us that are in the Capitol. There are pancake breakfasts and parades and Rotary Club meetings and all of the different events in the district, and they really pay attention to who's there and who is talking to them about those issues that are plaguing this individual person or the industry. So I would really encourage you to form those relationships so that when I'm telling them something, you are also being able to pick up the phone or send him an email or a text and reiterate the same thing. Again, your voice is what they want to hear. They are there to represent your interests. And so the more vocal that you can be, the more engaged that you can be on that local level, it helps me immensely to have that. So I would really encourage you to spend some time. I know you're all very busy, but to spend some time really getting to know your lawmaker. And like I said earlier, with so many new faces, it really is critical to have those voices in the district.
Thank you, Erin. And Alexi, like to share some comments?
So I haven't been in this position very long, although it feels like forever. It's been a crazy year. But one of the things that I often heard and still sometimes hear is that there's this perception that California and Sacramento is out to get agriculture. And while that might be true for a small group, I don't actually believe that is what's driving most of these outcomes. What I think is far more likely is that there are just other groups, other interests that are simply showing up better equipped with far more resources than we are. Policy is not made in a vacuum. It is shaped by who sits at the table, who brings the data, and who applies the pressure. And that's exactly why the Almond Alliance exists. We advocate, we lobby, and we negotiate on behalf of the industry. And when I say this, what I mean and what this looks like in practice is that we are the ones who are supporting or opposing legislation, not after it passes, but while it's being drafted. We build relationships, as Erin mentioned, with regulators and agency staff so that they understand how their rules play out in the real world. We translate ABC research and data into policy arguments that are actionable. We draft amendment language to fix harmful bills. We submit formal comments and testimony to regulators. We form coalitions with other industries to build weight when almonds cannot carry an issue on our own. And we support candidates who understand our industry. That is advocacy. It's methodical, it is technical, it is relational, and it is persistent. And it is the only lever that we have that can change the rules that we all operate under. And without it, policy becomes something that happens to our industry rather than something that is shaped by those who understand it best. So I encourage you to please come down, stop by our booth to learn more about how you can get involved and help take control over the future of our industry.
Thank you, Alexi. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to clarify a little bit of something. I think at times people get the Almond Board confused with the Almond Alliance, and the Almond Alliance is an independent organization. It receives no funding from the Almond Board of California. The Almond Board of California cannot lobby for almonds at the state level or federally, whereas we can do that. And that's why we need membership. We need PAC donations. When you compare our industry and the size of our PAC, which is a political action committee, how much money we have to donate to try and benefit our industry and represent it, compared to other commodities and crops, we're way behind when it comes to dollars in that area. And a lot of guys out here are spending $10 to $20 an acre to spray to get rid of pests out there in the orchard. And I mean, just $1 an acre in our industry would make a huge difference to help us continue to be able to farm and do what we do here. So please take the time to come by the booth or look us up, check it out, do what you can to become involved. Thank you for all coming. At this point, we'll take some questions. I don't know if Annie has some there. All right. First question is, what is the Almond Alliance doing to get the government to purchase almonds? It was 0 this past year.
We are, So it is not zero. They haven't made a decision yet. We put in a request for a Section 32 purchase for $150 million. In addition to that, if anybody has packed for this spec, it is incredibly difficult. So we did put in some language to try and help alleviate some of the restrictions there. Because of the government shutdown, everything has sort of come to almost a standstill. There was a first round of announcements that were made. We anticipate that almonds will be announced soon. Will we get the full 150 million? I don't know. That being said, it's the largest amount that we have ever requested, and I'm optimistic that we will get a purchase. And we have to find the packers that are going to be able to do it. But I reached out to a bunch of them before I made the request to make sure that we'd be able to pack that if in fact we did get it, and they assured me that they would do it. So,
thank you, Alexi. The other question I have here is, you named a number of successes both at state and federal level. What does the Alliance do to get lawmakers that may not have direct connection to almonds to care about our issues? And I can kind of answer that one. We put quite a bit of an effort into meeting with the lawmakers, as was mentioned earlier, from cities and different areas that don't have almonds. And when they're here at the state capitol, taking them for tours, getting them involved to understand that food doesn't come from the grocery store. It comes from hardworking people that care about the environment, that care about the ground, that's their livelihood. And when they come out and meet folks like yourselves and see what's going on, it makes a real big difference, because their perception in the city of what's going on out there is much different than the reality. So we take the time to get those people and get them out there on farm and at facilities to see what's going on and see the good things that we are doing as an industry. I don't know if any of our other panelists have anything else to say there. Erin, if you look like you're ready.
That was a fantastic answer, Blake. Yeah.
I would add to that, because I think it's a really good question, because, in the Central Valley, obviously ag is very important, but when you go beyond into the urban areas, there's a lack of understanding of, how important agriculture is. And that's where we're really relying heavily on ABC data to help to illustrate just how important agriculture is, not only just the almond industry, but as a whole to the entire state economy, and then how it impacts the bottom line for the people that they represent. Because when the cost of production goes up here, it will ultimately be felt in the supermarkets and by those that elect them. So there is this sort of broader sort of circle that you sort of have to illustrate, and we're continuing to build upon that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you touched on everything that I touched on previously about, what we're doing in terms of maybe supporting some legislation or working with an author that's a non-traditional, non-ag representing, author. I think we've also been really fortunate in the past election cycle to have a couple really great voices for ag that were elected. Ali Macedo, David Tangipa, that they're very vocal, and they have also taken it upon themselves to kind of force their colleagues to come out and do these tours and really educate them. And I think that does carry a lot of the same weight as I was talking about that you do in the district. But just to have your colleague, be able to talk to you on some of these issues and really educate you, I think has been extremely helpful in terms of having stronger voices in the legislature for the ag community as well to back up what we're all doing.
Thank you. I've got one more question here. What approaches are being taken on the rodent control issues?
We've been working, as referenced earlier, with CDFA and DPR and all of the research arms. I think the difficulty is finding a solution that's going to work. I think Katie referenced it as well in her comments, right? We first have to figure out what's the scope of the problem and what is working in terms of control. And then, how do we adapt and adjust to that and come up with the coordinated approach between all of the different agencies? how do we get funding? As I indicated earlier, there's a continued budgetary crisis in California. So between state and federal funding, how are we able to get funding for the research, for the data collection, for the mitigation, that were needed? But we have had several stakeholder meetings that have been reconvened with all of the ag interests, as well as the policymakers, as well as the regulatory bodies. So work is in progress, and we're working very closely with all of those agencies to try and other commodity groups. So there's a very large coalition of us that are having at least once a month meetings on this.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to that is we're really trying to push, okay, Erin touched on the fact that we are in a budget crisis right now. It's like, okay, well, if we can't provide funding, then what else can we do? And so that communication component is incredibly important from the standpoint of getting a scope of the problem, but also to be able to communicate what is working, what is not working. And then, Erin touched on this, getting each of the agencies to work together, because what our concern is that this problem continues to expand, and then it poses a health risk, and so we don't want it to get to that level. And so making sure that the industry or that the administration understands what is at risk, and that given the size, especially of California almonds specifically, the potential for impact to other crops is also there as well. So we really want to get ahead of this as much as we can with the resources that we do have.
Well, that's all the questions that we've received, but I'd like to thank all of you for coming and joining us this morning. This is one of the earlier sessions, and I didn't think we'd have this many people, so I'm really happy with the turnout. Thank you all for taking the time to come and hear about what we're doing and some of the issues. I hope you all have a great conference, and thank you very much.